Cynicism is just another form of cowardice. Were our sergeants not interested in the midlife crisis if we were to do our written work?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 20 of the Spotlight Podcast, Success Stories for Veterans, where it is our job to break down and analyze titans from both the military and civilian communities to discover their tactics, their mindset, and their systems so that you can take those and apply them to your life and ultimately to your transition. Those titans range from New York Times bestselling authors to former heads of state to other divergent thinkers who are out there dominating their field by challenging conventional wisdom. And today we're interviewing Stephen Cullen. Stephen got his start as a logistician in the Marines, and after the Marines, Stephen found himself in a career path that made him feel like he was just making a bad situation work. Now, Stephen runs the podcast production company Knucklehead Media Group and is the host on their flagship podcast, Knuckleheads podcast. So how does Stephen do it? Listen and find out. So give me, for those of the audience that may not be aware of who you are, what you do, give me a little bit of the background. Who are you?
No, I appreciate that, Carson. Well, I thank you very much for welcoming me to your show. It's an honor to talk with you and your audience. I enjoy folks like you who spent some time in the military, who've been able to endure having a last name that creates a lot of opportunity to get poked fun at. My last name's Cullen. First name's Stephen. So for those of you who are English teachers, you only process it as punctuation marks. However, Cullen also is a body part, which lends itself to some pretty off-color and inappropriate jokes that we've been the victim, or I've been the victim of, that now my kids get to be the victim of for the rest of their life. So, my name's Stephen Cullen. I run a podcast production agency here in Dallas, Texas, called Knucklehead Media Group. I'm a host of our flagship show, Knucklehead Podcast, but we build processes and systems to bring dead leads to life for corporations. We do that through micro content. We do that through podcast production, and we help facilitate a culture of trust with your digital audience. So we bring a human voice to your website, and we allow folks that are willing and able to get vulnerable, speaking into a microphone. We actually use that voice and your willingness to do that to convert and provide long-term value to your customers and your audience that gets primarily their information from podcasting.
Now, just real quick, just because we're on the subject of podcasting, and there's still a lot. I think podcasts are one of the most controversial marketing techniques that are out there right
100%,
now.
Of course,
because people are like, "Don't podcast; it's going downhill. The listenership's down." And you have other people like, "Absolutely, podcast. You should start one today." What do you say when you hear stuff like that?
That's a good question. So you got to understand that since the beginning of time, there's been people with an opinion, and then there's also been a compare and contrast model, which is very helpful for learning, which is essentially just a presentation of two opposing ideas in the form of an argument and giving people the ability to come to their own conclusion. So that's what I see there. Is I see the framing up of an argument and folks having having the ability to process that information to arrive to a decision. And that's simply it. Nothing more, nothing less. There's not a definitive statement. That's not true, because people are saying it's going downhill, listenership is down. I don't necessarily, if I agree with that argument. Black and white television, 3 broadcast channel media, or 3 broadcasts networks back in the 1950s, if they decided to stop then, they could say that viewership was down, but there's no need for a new network. And yet there's new television networks that are popping up all the time. With the advent of esports now as a thing, thank God that ABC decided to iterate and purchase ESPN. And then now there's probably going to be an ESPN video streaming network that's exists. So everybody that says, it's not a thing that you should do, either doesn't know a whole lot about the industry in itself, and they're right, and that's fine. They can have an opinion about it. However, they also don't understand that if people's attention are gravitated towards that particular medium, then they need to capitalize on it. And if they're not sure how to capitalize on it, they need to talk with somebody like us that can help them navigate one step to another to actually help them turn their marketing dollars, instead of it just being a cost center, to a revenue generator.
You talk a lot about processes. what would, if I'm a total beginner, maybe this is something that's going on in my mind, and I'm seeing a lot of veterans discussing this question in their mind right now with their personal branding. You know, how am I going to market myself in the job market, or if I'm going to be an entrepreneur, how am I going to take that next step? What do you think the first step is in that process as you're mentally deciding whether or not you pursue this?
That's a good question. So all I can tell you is I run a business called Knucklehead, right? So that's a Knucklehead is kind of the pejorative kind of poke fun way of saying, hey, listen, you didn't do things right perfectly the first time. So therefore you are now something. And so that descriptive adjective that we use to describe that process is Knucklehead, right? Every single doctor, lawyer, I want to say service professional, maybe medical or legal professional, what's the word they use to describe their service whenever they do their service? What is the word that the industry uses to describe that?
I'm not sure.
It's called practicing. They're practicing law. They're practicing.
Okay, yeah.
So going back to youth sports, what did it mean before you played a game? What did you have before you went to a game?
You got to practice.
Did you? And what is the term if you try to do something perfectly? What makes perfect?
Practice.
Okay, so it insinuates that you're going to mess it up. It's in the word.
I got
and these quote unquote professionals who are industry experts who essentially carry with it a very, very important thing in today's marketplace, which is legal services and medical professional services. They practice it, and they practice it meaning it's different. The process is the same, but the net result or the end result is a little bit different every time. So as a veteran, one of the hardest things to do is to begin with the end in mind. And when I say that is begin with the end in mind, you're trying to solve for what you want to do at 70 years old, the second that you take off the uniform. Yeah. And it's impossible. If you go back and you study folks who have been able to accomplish anything significant over the course of their lifetime, with the exception of maybe some tech entrepreneurs, and success is a loosely interpreted term if you're going to talk about tech entrepreneurs. There's folks who just truly don't understand that it's going to take time, and you have to be patient with yourself if you're not clear on exactly what you want to do. So my encouragement is to be patient with yourself and I don't want to say not be patient, because a lot of times you're subject to what outside forces are doing. So if you have a wife, a kid, you have a timeline, you have a bank account, you have bills that are putting this external pressure on you in order to produce, then you can be less patient with yourself. So then you have to be more disciplined with your time management whenever you're not in your revenue producing hours throughout the day. So my encouragement would be to be patient with yourself. And then if you don't have the flexibility to be patient, to be more disciplined with what available time you do have. And if you're talking about veterans specifically, Carson, then what I'm talking about is you already were disciplined at one point in time because you went through boot camp and you earned the title of either airman, Marine, Coastie, soldier, seaman, whatever your MOS was, regardless of what your service was, you know how to be disciplined. You can follow a process. Now you may have wanted to, punch your drill instructor in the face, or maybe you have this adversarial relationship with authority, which I know I did whenever I got out of the military. But that's just a maturity thing. That's just because it's new. So realize that you are now the drill instructor for your life. You followed, a process to become disciplined. So now just put some rigidity or some structure around at least maybe 1 hour of your life. And then if, when you're starting it, and then iteratively grow from there. I know whenever we have a slogan that we use called "Get Some Wins," and it's because I went through anxiety, I went through depression, I went through having a pregnant wife and me sleeping on my bed until 11 o'clock in the morning for the first 2 or 3 weeks when I got out of the military. And here my wife is getting up to go and be a personal trainer at the gym while she's pregnant carrying my kid. And how big of a loser did I feel like?
Yeah.
And how do you overcome that mental inertia? Right. And it started with Get Some Wins. And now this is going back a few years. However, you have to be willing to look at yourself in the mirror and not kid yourself that you're not getting anything done, and then be disciplined with what small available windows of time you do have to go out and be productive.
Is there anything that you use to help keep you on track, whether it's tools or otherwise?
That's a good question. So is your audience mainly veterans?
Yeah, almost exclusively.
Okay. So if you have, you remember the green monster, like the Marine Corps? Okay. All right. So mine's black now, but I still have access to some of the old notebooks that I used to write down. My wife was like, why do you get, there you go. So you have one too. So my wife's like, why do you have these things? You don't even go back and look at them. It's like, I do every so often. But the habit of writing things down, I think it's statistically proven. There's a book that's written, I think it's Success, the Glenn Bland Method. I could be wrong, but it talks about whenever you document or write things down, the odds of you retaining whatever it is that you're listening to increase by 40%. It could be 50%. I could be wrong, but I could be butchering those stats. But the reality is I need all the help I can get. I'm just some knuckle dragging, Marine who has got time working against me and decision making, who's not necessarily been the greatest over the years. So I need all the help I can get, right? And so if I can write things down to potentially retain more information as I'm talking to folks throughout the meeting, that helps.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I'm a huge fan. I was suckered into the digital world, and I've come completely full circle back into analog, and then design it analog and then make it digital later when it needs to be. So talk to me a little bit about, you're talking about get some wins. You fix the discipline issue, and you're like, okay, I'm trying to get some wins. And I've talked to a lot of veterans who feel like they're being very disciplined, and I would agree that they are. I look at their calendar, I see everything set up, but they're still feeling like they're banging their head against the wall. What wins should you be focusing on early versus later?
It's a good question. So a lot of folks who feel like that probably aren't talking to the right mentors. And the reason why I say that is because they're not clear on what their objective is. Any op order that's been written in the history of the planet does not start with, or does not go forth without a commander's intent, right? You have a commander's intent. So you have your goal of what you're looking to accomplish, right? It's really simple. If you don't have a goal of what it is that you're looking to accomplish, then it's not so much about the goal is whether or not it's the right goal. I talked to somebody a little bit earlier this morning, and they used the phrase, the 3-foot circle around you. And the 3-foot circle around you is who is your closest relationships with, and then maybe 1 or 2 steps removed from who those folks are. And if you're struggling to pay your bills, if you don't have discipline in terms of what your financial spending is, then there's a lot of external pressure on you to make the right choice. And so you're kind of paralyzed in terms of your creativity to go out there and produce a different solution. So that's why it's so imperative to have conversations with folks who make your palms sweaty and make your heart race a little bit, and realize that they're not judging you. You're being super critical of yourself. So just have more conversations with folks that make you feel like that, and you have enough of them, then you won't be as nervous anymore.
Yeah, I completely agree. But how do you find or define that objective such that you know who you need to talk to? Because to me, it's a hunting question. How do I figure out who I go after?
That's a good question. I think it's a really good question. So you have to start. The reason why I always say get some wins, and the reason why I come back to the beginning of it is, first of all, it insinuates that somebody else has got it figured out. And the reality is, depending upon what you pay attention to the most, the majority of, I would say closer to 99% of people don't. They don't. The 1% that do, they're not necessarily making themselves available for you, but you have to seek them out. So we just had somebody on the podcast, Knucklehead podcast. It was a few episodes ago. I think it was episode 104, and his name's Heath Hill. He's my wife's cousin, right? So he's in my 3-foot circle, right? He's closely related, but I also used to work for him. He runs an experiential marketing business. I moved my entire family from Austin to Dallas to take a job running quality control. He's never had quality control at his department before, or excuse me, at his company before. He never had a defined systems and processes to have, an optimization of quality control for any of his business. So why not hire a Marine to go and help him do that, right?
Yeah.
But I say all that to say that he's also a very successful real estate entrepreneur. He's a habitual entrepreneur, and he talks about this process of communicating with folks that are more seasoned in life.
Yeah.
And then finding folks that are a little bit younger than you to pass that information off to, and then a sphere of influence in terms of your peers to be able to just collaborate with and bounce things off of. And so that information flow does two things. One, it constantly makes you wanting to seek. It constantly makes you want to iterate with folks who think like you so you could optimize it, your understanding. Mm-hmm. And then it forces you to have to compile it all in kind of teaching form so you can pass it on to folks that are younger than you. But it's a constant process.
Yes.
What a lot of times people are looking for, to answer your question, is they're looking for like a supplement or a vaccine or a Tylenol for their headache. It doesn't work, because you got to be willing to change your habits, and then you got to be willing to invest time and not get a return for a period of time to find the right people that fit into that communication cycle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a ton of sense to me, because I agree with you. I call it, finding the fishing holes, right? Like, who are these people? Where do they exist? Who are these youngsters that I can help?
Yep.
And who are they needing to hear from that isn't me just yet? And then eventually you move on to the next phase and you become the next level. You become the older, seasoned person. And then So I completely agree with the sphere of influence. Absolutely. And you talked about the external pressure. And I think that this is something that is not being discussed enough.
Yeah.
Specifically the external financial pressure. And you talked about how that can inhibit your creativity, because it's a constraint and you have to make decisions based on this constraint. How would you recommend, especially people who are fresher into the veteran process, the transition process, how would you advise them to handle that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's 200,000 veterans that transition every year. Is that right? Or is that wrong?
That's pretty close.
And then how many people are going from the workaday world to retired every year? Do you know?
I don't know the answer to that, but I want to say it's maybe 10% of that overall number.
So it's a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot.
It's a
lot of people. So, So the problem that you're talking about is going to be, it's existing for a lot of people. Meaning, what happens when you're dealing with external financial pressure and you're forced to make good decisions, and you want to make more good decisions than bad decisions when it comes to financial pressure. I think that, to answer your question, I remember when I was asked to lead a sales team, the organization and culture that I built this team around wasn't very stable. The HR director didn't agree with me politically the same way that I did. The owner of the company never wanted to commit to being married. There was a lot of crap associated with this culture.
Yeah.
And here I was asked to build a team that was functioning, optimal, a high, well-oiled machine in terms of producing revenue in a culture that wasn't necessarily all that great. So it was, and then on top of that, I was going through marital issues because my communication sucked. And we were coming out of some really, really significant financial pressure because I had goals that I wanted to make over six figures. And so that required me taking some risk in order to have an opportunity like that. And when I didn't make the best decisions professionally, I didn't have that opportunity. I didn't have a whole lot of opportunities. So I felt like I was forced to make the one that was a crappy one work the best.
Yeah.
So I say all that to say that those are the dynamics and the variables in my situation. And so what I had to do was I had to learn how to be a fish out of water and kind of play the game to a certain extent. Like I tried to get along with these people that didn't think like me, that really didn't want to get along with me either.
Yeah.
And I built a team to produce millions of dollars of revenue for this business, but eventually made a poor decision when it came to my judgment, because the woman who was running that particular team was lying to the guy who worked for me, or that I worked for. And I shot a text over to my wife after a confrontation that I had with her. And I wasn't filtered. I didn't, the way you said it, a hyper stylized recount of the events.
Yeah.
I didn't. I was unfiltered. I said exactly how I felt about this woman. It turns out that I was texting her though instead of my wife.
No.
So
no.
that is what I call a knucklehead moment.
Yeah.
And that was what the inspiration, the creative inspiration that I needed in order to remove myself from that environment and go find a better fit when it came to work. And I think as veterans, what we feel like we're forced to do is to make a crappy situation work, because that's what we had to do whenever we were in the military. We make applesauce out of apples because that's where our skill set lies. And we don't take the time to evaluate whether or not we actually truly want to be a part of this organization that is not treating us very good, which is in the civilian world. There's a million of them that are out there, regardless of if there's a recession, a crappy, job market, crappy economy, whatever the case may be. You have the ability to go find other folks to go work. You do. Straight up, you do. They're out there.
Mm-hmm.
You just got to look for them. And then be willing to say, you know what, I made a wrong decision. The folks that I thought I could align myself with, I may need to go look again, because I didn't make the right choice on what organization to be aligned with.
Absolutely. And you talked about when you're making that move that you kind of, it seemed to me, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that you approached that individual and said, hey, like, I want to work for you, and here's what I can do for you. I can do this quality control. It seemed like the position was invented for you. Is that accurate?
Well, it's a good question. So most people, whenever they're looking for a job, where's the first place they go? They go to a job board, or they go to some easy solution that they can get their hands on and finger right away. Right.
Yeah. LinkedIn, easy apply. Yeah, exactly.
There you go. Something like that. Very simple, very frictionless.
Yep.
So you got to think about that just from a process standpoint. Why are those things even available to begin with? Is it because that's the right way, or because the people who have a career in that particular sphere want to make it easy to look at a bunch of people quickly?
Yep.
Which one is it?
It's definitely the latter.
Yeah. And so it's not necessarily to make it easy for you to find jobs. It's make it easy for them to evaluate who they're looking for.
Yeah. It's a filtering mechanism.
That's 100%. It took me 6 jobs to figure that out though. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Applicant tracking systems are the best way to throw your job hunt down the toilet, in my opinion.
So then if that's the case, if your network is your net worth, like I've heard so many people say that before, and you're not willing to get off your couch because you're so depressed about the poor decisions you've made, and you don't necessarily make any different ones, and you have this unrealistic expectation that you're worth 6 figures or 7 figures or 8 figures or whatever it is, and you're not willing to back that up, so therefore your confidence and your conviction about saying those things is not genuine, you're up a creek. You're really up. You're really hurting. And that's why a lot of veterans struggle with substance abuse and, depression and anxiety and all that crap, because they make poor decisions and they don't have a calibration metric out there to change the decisions that they're making. And then they don't have a validation metric enough to validate and develop the confidence and skill set and resistance and mental fortitude to go out there to validate that they're making the right decision. So I think your question was, your question was, the job was invented. Not every role, but the last 2 to 3 roles that I've had were invented. I wrote the job description. I carved out essentially the 30, 60, 90 day plan. I executed that plan. I gave KPIs to the person to hold me accountable for my performance. And that's essentially how I built my business as well, because I kind of try to do that same thing for each one of my clients, so they know their hard-earned money and dollars, which is now revenue to our business, there needs to be some type of calibration metric so they know that they're getting a good deal and they can evaluate the decision point on whether or not they want to continue to do business with us going forward.
Yeah. And interestingly, I think it also helps you clarify expectations of what you're going to do, because I see a lot of veterans get trapped in, they kind of pitch themselves as the hero and then they don't necessarily deliver because it's not super clear what they were saying they were going to do. And then they end up jobless again, getting fired.
Yeah. And that's happened. I remember one lady in particular, it happened. She thought I was going to be the savior of the business when in fact we just weren't aligned to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to think about that. You got to be willing to, first of all, to put yourself out there, and go through the uncomfortable feeling of sitting in the office and doing work, but it not necessarily being the original work that they wanted you to do. Yeah. And then you get to that eventual decision point where you realize we've got to go separate ways because this isn't working.
Yeah.
It's like a relationship, and it was very difficult for her. And, she kind of got put between a rock and a hard place. Her business was, because she didn't have somebody to go out there and perform that function for her. Now, is that my fault or is that her fault? I'd say it's both.
Yeah.
Right. But it was more her fault.
Yeah. Well, she's got to own it.
And she has to. However, I'd say it's more her fault. I choose to have the mindset that it was really my fault because I'm the one who decided to go there. I decided this whole process, but it was also her decision as a business owner to bring me on board and to not provide training and, all of those things that are associated with a new opportunity like that.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked about frictionless environments versus the people that I see being successful are people who are creating tension
100%.
in the relationship. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you've perceived over the years and how you've developed that mindset?
Yeah. So it works against you sometimes.
Yeah.
But if you take a rubber band and you pull it, and the reason why I use this analogy is because it's most helpful. So if you pull a rubber band and you pull it and you pull it and you pull it, it's just got 2 points of pressure that are pulling on it. What happens if you put pressure on a different point whenever it's completely stretched? What happens to it?
It's going to get even tighter. I don't know.
It would get tighter, but it could potentially break.
Okay.
It's probably going to break. And so in a frictionless environment, it's like a rubber band that doesn't have any tension on it. It's useless. Right. So it's about the balance between which of those two states work the most. A really, really good entrepreneur who's way better than I am at product development said a long time ago, he did a study. I can't remember exactly how many people he talked with, but he talks about the state of euphoria and like hypertension, like prison, as the spectrum of pressure. And equilibrium in the middle would be just kind of a balance between the two. And then they said, what are people's most happiest or most enjoyable states? And most people would think euphoria would be the answer versus somebody in prison who's essentially in prison. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But it was actually just past equilibrium to the side of euphoria, not all the way over on either side. It was just enough past where there was tension, but enjoyable at the same time. So just enough freedom. And the reason why that was the optimal point for people is because that's where you run into the resistance of like, gosh, I'm messing up, I'm screwing up, but I'm able to iteratively talk to somebody about setting these small goals and small wins. And I can kind of come back to that step one. And once you've accomplished that, then you understand how you've gotten there, and then you can take step 2 and then step 3. So for instance, my skill set is sales and business development. Well, it required that I work in a job where I had to make over 100 telephone calls every single day, right? That's step 1. And then once you've understood how that skill set gets developed, how do you find the right relationships to talk to in order to find the right decision makers? Mm-hmm. And then once you've accumulated and consolidated enough decision makers in one particular account, now all of a sudden you develop a skill set of you have the opportunity to develop the skill set of enterprise account relationship development. And then so when you tie those two things together and you've onboarded new sales reps, now all of a sudden you have sales leadership as part of your skill set. So eventually you get to a point where then you build entire channels around revenue producing mechanisms, which is called channel development. And then so you start adding these skill sets to your Rolodex of what you can do and what you can do well. now all of a sudden you can literally know how to build systems and processes around revenue creating channels for a business. Now that you can become a CRO, or you can become a CEO, or you can do those things that are very difficult to do if you study enough right people and enough time goes by. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the right people real quick. If you are recommending, 3 books that you constantly recommend, and you think veterans specifically benefit from, what would they be?
Extreme Ownership is a really good one. And just because I'm think what you want about the SEALs, you can't argue with the results that they've been able to get. You can't, ethics and values and morals aside, which people can poke holes using those. Yeah. You can, anyway, it's a really good book. There's some people who are like, you shouldn't teach that because it's exclusive to a community. I understand where you're coming from, but this is a really, really good book because I think that these folks are really well intended. I'm just looking at the books that I have over here.
No.
One of the more foundational books was The Magic of Thinking Big. That's more of a mindset book. There's also a book called Mindset written by a woman named Carol Dweck that's kind of accomplishes the same thing. The Magic of Thinking Big gives you a perspective on either a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. And then Carol Dweck actually wrote a book about growth mindset, fixed mindset, in a book called Mindset. So that's a really, really good one. You asked for 3. I've already given you 3. I apologize, but
no, that's 3. That works.
And then, okay, good to go.
But if there's one more, lay them on me.
So one of my buddies, his name's Trace Johannesson. He's a city council member here in Rockwall, where I live. He gave me a book called How to Measure Anything. And I was like, that's crazy. How can you, what are you talking about? Measure anything? And the book is phenomenal. It's a really good book. Chris Voss just wrote a book called Never Split the Difference.
I love that book.
It's a really good book. Yeah. So, those are really good books. So those are helpful when it comes to perspective. And if you're not reading, I don't want to say consistently, because I don't read every single day, like where I'm intentional. I block off the 15, 20 minutes to read. I try to just read as I'm going through the day. Mm-hmm. And, at nighttime and, some in the mornings. I've tried to develop this routine on when I'm going to do it. And I haven't been able to block the 15 minutes and do it. I just know that it gets done at some point in time throughout the day.
Yeah.
The difference between people who don't read and the people who can't read, what's the difference between them?
People who read just kept doing it.
Well, the people who don't read and the people who can't read, is there that much of a difference?
No.
There you go. So
there's no
block the time to read. Just read. Figure it out. And it's the same people who are on conference calls all day long, and they're like, I'm on conference calls. I can't get enough work done because I'm always on conference calls, or I'm going from one call to the next. It's like, well, the answer is yeah. So
take time.
So start saying no.
Yeah.
to conference calls.
Oh, meetings. I could do an entire episode just about meetings and conference calls specifically.
You and me both.
Oh my God. Both. So we're running low on time here, and I know you're a busy guy.
Here you go.
If there were any last pieces of advice, to specifically to ambitious veterans who are maybe feeling stuck in this transition purgatory of being on the couch, and you're like, I don't know what to do. What is something that you wish, or anything that you wish that you had known day one that would have just made it so much easier?
See, the thing is I think that I was not all that different than a lot of other veterans. And what I mean by that is I didn't think that I needed help. I didn't think that I needed somebody else to tell me. I had a lot of ego involved, pride, a lot of arrogance, a lot of disconnection, because you have this mindset that you just, you can accomplish anything, you can do anything, because you just got done being a Marine, or you got done fighting a war in Iraq, or whatever it was. But the reality is you may be lacking the business acumen to go and provide immediate value to a business, and you don't have enough of a network or relationship to where if you don't have an answer to a problem, you can go reach out, touch somebody, and bring them in to help you solve that problem. So and the thing is I just didn't think I needed help. So when I first got out, like being willing to admit that you're going to need help, not help like you're weak, help like you probably just need a pair of glasses, like your eyes don't work as the way that they need to, or, hey, listen, you have ear pro whenever you go fire on the rifle range for a reason. Like it's not because your ears are weak, you ding dong. It's because they need protection. It's the same way whenever you get out. If it took 13 weeks to earn the title of being a Marine, why does the United States military only provide 168 hours for you to transition to become a fully functional civilian? It's because that's not what they do. It's because that's what you're supposed to do. It's your life. It's not their life, right? They've perfected taking undisciplined civilians to provide value to the DOD in the form of a Marine, airman, soldier, or sailor, or coastie. So they understand that process takes time. It's not their job to go and make sure that you can go through life with a nerfed up world or have pillow hands to make sure that you don't cut your fingers. That's your job. So I didn't have enough of those difficult conversations getting out before I got out. And I probably should have.
How would you recommend, whether it's somebody who is around veteran or the veteran themselves thinking maybe they don't need help? How do you conquer that? Because
they have to go through pain.
Okay.
They have to go through pain. There are resources. It's not a resource problem though. It's a lack of resourcefulness. And I stole that. Like anything that's good, you steal it and then you repurpose it to yourself. It's like the OODA loop principle from the 1950s. It's been bastardized so much just because it works really, really well, but you have to go through pain. You have to be willing to go through pain and realize you're not made of glass. You will get your nose bloodied. You will get your lip jacked up. You will stub your toe.
Yeah. I don't think I've talked to a single veteran who hasn't yet.
Well, the thing is the Wall Street banker, the private equity, VC capitalist, each one that's out there, depending upon how they market themselves or market their business, the perception is that they are God. They can make no mistakes, and not only can they not make mistakes, you're making a mistake if you don't trust them and their judgment. And the reality is that's bullshit. Every single person makes mistakes and screws up. As a matter of fact, I think it was the Hilton, that I could be off base there. He's just like, the only reason why I am where I am is because I made more mistakes than you have, and I've had to overcome more than you. Mark Cuban does a really good job of providing examples of businesses of his that have not worked out. His willingness to talk about them and that demeanor that he has with making mistakes. He's not hyper-focused necessarily on the result with his messaging. He's focused on the result with his decision-making. But in order to learn, he's willing to share those mistakes so you can learn how to have a better result.
Yeah, he's fantastic as well. I really like him. So let's take a few minutes here at the end and talk about you. You've got a lot of interesting stuff going on, and we talked about it before the show, but lay it out for me now for anybody who wants to get involved in what you're currently doing.
Cool. Well, if you're a business, you're in charge of a department, if you're in charge of the revenue producing mechanism at an organization, my encouragement to you is to reach out to us. Why? Because we can help you. We've been there. Our business is predicated on being able to bring dead leads to life, right? And so my encouragement to you is to learn how to use somebody's voice and pipe that message directly into the ears of your unengaged audience. And we call it bringing dead leads to life. That's what we do, simply because we can help you craft craft a congruent through line between where your unengaged audience was to your your hyper-focused, hyper-excited, supercharged advocates are out there talking about it. And we can map that entire process out and help you do that. Mm-hmm. And now when it comes to, e-commerce type products, I'm not a D2C guy. However, we do have shirts available that, by the time folks are listening to this, we're not probably completely out of the COVID-19 challenges that folks are out there fighting right now. So what we did is we figured, how can we help give, I don't want to say just give back, but how can we help support our community? And one of the ways that we felt that we could do that is providing food to kids that don't have access to food outside of the school lunch program. And then how can we help provide PPE or in-home testing to folks that already have those channels set up? So how can we do that? So what we did is we created a shirt called the COVID-19 Survivor Shirt, right? And it says undefeated on the back, and it's the military green. It's the stereotypical shirt, but go and buy one. Go on knuckleheadpodcast.com/shop and go get it. And what happened is we'll take the profits that we made from that, and we'll go back and buy food. We'll go back and we'll purchase masks, and we'll actually go out and subsidize the cost of those COVID-19 in-home tests through the U.S. mobile drug testing that's here in Dallas that actually provides those tests to workers here locally. And that's what we did. And funny story about that, I didn't realize that the Federal Task Force on COVID-19 activated the FBI to go investigate the supply chain and purchase of these particular masks. But we got on their radar by doing this. So, oops.
Wow. Yeah. Mistake, maybe. I don't know. I think not.
It's all I know is the nurses that are going to get the masks are going to appreciate it. And if we happen to have a conversation with the FBI guys, then so be it.
No, I think that's a fantastic story. Actually, that's outstanding. So, Stephen, thank you for coming on, sharing everything.
You bet. Appreciate it, Carson.
Hey everyone, thanks again for listening to another episode of the Spotlight Podcast. And I just wanted to take a second to ask you who you think should be interviewed on the show. Who do you think is out there that's just absolutely crushing it that the veteran population needs to hear from? That's what we want to hear from you. Send us your suggestions to spotlight@thezenveteran.com. That's SPOTLIGHT @thezenveteran.com. Thanks again for listening.